Let's get to it. It's fight week, fellas. The UFC's headed to Boston for UFC 292. And at the top of the bill, we have Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. Lots to talk about in my favorite weight class. I'm all about the bantamweights. Is this the biggest fight, bantamweight title fight ever? Is Aljo the bantamweight goat already, or does he need a win? Let's unpack all this. Nolan, start things off, man. They're headed your way. You must be pumped.
Yeah, I'm stoked, man. It's been a long 3.5 years or almost 4 years since the UFC came here. Obviously, from the pandemic on, they have not been. The last time they were here was October 2019 when Dominic Reyes knocked out Chris Weidman right before he got his title shot at John Jones. So that seems like a lifetime ago. But they are here. They have a big bantamweight title fight. Card's taken a number of different hits to the main card, but that one fight has remained intact. And I think that's the money fight, right? That's the one that everybody's excited for. It's a great main event, and it might be up there with the best bantamweight or biggest bantamweight title fights of all time. It's kind of hard to tell. I think there's maybe some rivalries in the past that have been a little bit bigger through, Dom Cruz and Dillashaw, or Dillashaw and Garbrandt. So that remains to be seen. But I definitely think in terms of bantamweight history, this might be one of the biggest fights in that division's history, particularly because not only is this the surging contender, the guy that the UFC's tried to really boost and really promote and could be the next big thing, the next big star, Sean O'Malley getting his first title shot. But I think for Aljamain Sterling, it's equally as if not more important. This is a real legacy fight for him. If there's doubt in people's minds right now that he's that there's some people out there that think he's not the greatest bantamweight of all time as it stands right now, I think he definitely has the ability to persuade a bunch of them with this fight. I think this really puts a bow on it. If it is his final fight at bantamweight, I mean, this is his last shot to really expand that legacy and drive that conversation forward. So I'm excited for it. I think it's a great fight. It's an intriguing matchup. It's one that there's a lot riding on it. It's just that's more than a title. So great main event and one that's pretty big, if not the biggest in bantamweight history.
Thank you for all that, Nolan. Boy, do you sound grumpy, man. This is gross what you just said. All right, Dan, how about you, man? Share with us your thoughts on UFC 292, the bantamweights. I know you're a fan of that weight class and these fighters.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of bantamweight. As far as the fights go, greatest fight, greatest fighter. We'll see about that. I think Aljamain Sterling definitely has. Anybody who's calling him the greatest isn't crazy. For me, it's still Dominic Cruz, and as well as Dominic Cruz still holding that title for the greatest fight. I recently did top 5 bantamweight fights, as I've been doing evergreen content. For those of you who've been noticing, thank you very much for the loves and shares. We recently did the bantamweight fights. Gonna have to redo my flyweight fights, by the way, some Russian ones and what happened with Pantoja and Moreno. But going back over bantamweight fights, it's really hard to get around not including that second fight with Uriah Faber and Dominic Cruz, two guys who really did their parts in building 2 different divisions. But as far as bantamweight goes, that's probably still a really big one. If we look back in history, I'm sure George and Goes will have their opinions on this too. But, we'll see about that. Is it a big fight? Absolutely. Am I excited? Absolutely.
Nice. Yes. Dan, I want to ask you, do you think Aljo walks in as the GOAT already, or can he accomplish it with this win, or does he still trail Dominic Cruz, who I think is everybody else's? And, to be fair, John Anik's already kind of put that crown on him. So has Sean O'Malley, although Sean O'Malley could just be playing, maybe building up what he is about to win. It's like a little strategy that in pro wrestling of putting your opponent over as well.
People talk about different weight classes and titles and title defenses, and these are all obviously things that need to be in the conversation, right? I'm not crapping on that. But what isn't talked about is fighting generational talents, fighting different generations, and not just the generations before you, because sometimes you really don't get those opportunities. And when they do, it's one of those things like, oh, you fought the shell of Renan Barão, right? And no offense to Renan Barão, but Renan Barão came after Dominic Cruz, and Renan Barão is probably Aljo's, probably his best legacy win. And mainly Aljamain Sterling has been fighting and beating, and convincingly beating a lot of times, right, the fighters of his era, whereas Dominic Cruz has kind of fought fighters from like 3 or 4 eras. Like, his win over Casey Kenny means a lot. It doesn't sound like it means a lot, especially in the pantheon of Dominic Cruz, But older fighters fighting post-prime is something we saw in boxing. Roberto Duran versus Iran Barkley, one of his best wins, because not just going up in weight, not just late in the career, these are post-prime victories. And the greats, if we really want to talk about greats, longevity, and the combat sports that we compare to, don't know why it doesn't get matched up enough. And Dominic Cruz, fighting 4 different generations at bantamweight, where you're supposed to age out, and most people can't even say they have notable victories in 3 generations or 2. Yeah, Dominic Cruz.
All right, fair enough. Let's move to Goes. Share your thoughts on this big fight that's coming up between Aljo and Sean O'Malley. How big is it in your eyes, and how big could Sean O'Malley come out of this should he be the winner?
I think it's really big. I don't know if it's the biggest. To me, honestly, the last one was probably one of the bigger ones, Cejudo. I mean, that's one of the biggest names in combat sports overall. So that to me was pretty huge. With Sean O'Malley, what I think is actually really big, it's big for Dana White's Contender Series. I mean, what a great way to promote a show like that, and then having an alum actually fighting for a title again. I think that's very big news. But Aljamain Sterling, Dan touched on a lot of stuff. Like, a lot of that stuff, I feel bad that it's kind of out of his control. For me, I still have Dominic Cruz in that spot, but it could very well change this weekend. It just sucks, there's certain things that have happened to Aljamain Sterling that are kind of out of his control. With TJ Dillashaw, like, it's hard to take that out of your mind, right? Knowing that a guy was that compromised going into a fight. Is that Aljamain Sterling's fault? No, right? The Peter Yan situation wasn't really, there's so many of those types of things that kind of hurt Aljamain Sterling. If I'm him, man, a win over Sean O'Malley, I think, is a big deal. This kid's getting better with every fight. He's already impressive now, but he does show improvement, and I think it will be a pretty good fight. At the end of that fight, I think that's where things get tricky, guys. I think that's where we all kind of wonder, well, what's going to happen next with Aljamain Sterling? And if I'm Aljamain Sterling, I think I stick around. I don't know how bad these cuts are for him. Hopefully, they're not the worst thing in the world. But if he can do them, boy, can he really cement some sort of legacy going forward if he could stick in his division and kind of muster up a few more wins. I think that's something that will be just insurmountable. I think we'll all kind of forget the little nuances that came with his title run. If he can kind of tack on a couple more, we'll be talking about this dude for a long time. But overall, I think this is going to be a fun fight.
Yep, and I disagree with M in the chat. He's not that pumped up about this fight. The chat, by the way, of course, you can all chime in with questions and comments. And of course, I was joking with my man Nolan. He always brings it strong. That was just a jab at Oliver Heisen Williams, who's just not digging the show. Hey, man, keep tuning in, and I think we'll change your mind, because all we do is our job here, and that's discuss mixed martial arts, the biggest stories in MMA, and we do it every week here. We will be doing it 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific for the next few weeks, and then we'll go back to our normal start times. Combat Companion, welcome to you as well. Don Piccolo, hey, what's up? Sky V's and El Daddy, we missed you live last week, but we're seeing you here live with us right now. Now, M, to be clear, is saying Aljo versus O'Malley is so lame for real fight fans that I'm already bored with this buildup. If Bantamweight is so full of highly skilled fighters and is full of great fights, why is Aljo testing his legacy versus O'Malley? I mean, the guy's like 16-1, and he beat a former champion in Peter Yan. So I think O'Malley, we got to get past this whole the UFC showing him some favoritism or anything like that, right, fellas?
It's kind of a tough situation, because I get where he's coming from, but he's proven, at every corner that he is a pretty good fighter, and he is improving with every fight. So I think after a while, trust me, I was one of those guys. I was kind of like, I still don't know what we have with this guy. And honestly, to this point, I'm still not sure, but it's more towards the good side than it is the bad side. I think he's kind of shown us, especially in that Yan fight, he can hang. The question is now, can he get over that hump? And that's what we got to figure out. But I feel where he's coming from. I think I just feel like maybe he should have shed that in the last fight.
My thing is, like, O'Malley's the next guy up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is the legacy fight is the whole picture. So for him to add another win potentially over the next guy up, it's not like Sean's like the number 7 and they're really reaching. Like, I think outside of Merab, if you can kind of make that argument that maybe he's also, done as much to earn a shot, but that's obviously not happening because he's a teammate. Like, O'Malley's the next guy. So this will just be another feather in Aljo's cap, taking out the next contender. And that whole picture, I think, is really what makes this the legacy fight.
Yeah, and I just think he's obviously a star. I think it'll be good for Aljo, you know, because O'Malley brings a big spotlight to the division as well. And Aljo slowly has been winning people over. The way he won the title, obviously that didn't sit well with many people, but man, these title defenses are starting to get racked up. You got to give the man some respect. It should be a great one.